Welcome, everybody, to a brief introductory episode to Crusader Kings III modding. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at some of the basic elements like structure, files, tools you'll need, some of the new fancy modding tools Paradox have actually added to Crusader Kings III to help you get started with your own mods, and finally, I've gotten special permission to go into the debugging mode, which is this incredible new tool that we've been given access to, but I'll have to talk about that one later. There's some caveats to that one. Before I start, I should point out that I've only had a small amount of time to really dive in and reverse engineer the CK3 scripting language, which has had some massive changes since Crusader Kings II. So this is really only going to be the first episode in a long line of videos I plan on doing to help, hopefully, encourage some CK2 modders to take up arms. There's like a lot of work to be done with things like the wiki, documentation, changes between this game and Crusader Kings II. So realistically, if all I achieve here is drumming up some interest in more skilled people, then I'll be more than happy with that. First part of this episode will be dedicated to those of you who have very little to no experience in modding CK2, the tools that you'll need for both CK2 and now CK3 going forward, how to set up things like Visual Studio Code to use the correct scripting languages so that you can create mods a lot more effectively, and some graphics programs that are going to come in very handy that you'll need to be able to produce graphics files for both CK2 and CK3. The end of the video will be dedicated to those of you with a bit more experience. I'll do a deep dive into a couple of mods that I've built. Again, I've had very little time to do it and to actually learn the differences so far, but the things that I have noticed with modding experience that are of note, things that are quite significant between this and Crusader Kings II, because again, there is a lot of changes between the two. I'm thinking, why don't we start at the very, very start and show you the new tools that Paradox have added to allow you to basically streamline the creation of your mods and some of the upload features that they've added as well, fixing one of my biggest complaints with CK2, and that was, of course, distribution of mods being a massive pain in the ass. So, before I go, obviously, into launching the game here and showing you some of the tools we have access to, please bear in mind I'm playing on a preview build of Crusader Kings III. Some of what you see could be subject to change, some of it may not work as is intended right now, but I imagine will be changed in the future. Let's go ahead and launch it up. So, CK3 actually has a dedicated launcher, which is fantastic for a few reasons. Firstly, for those of you maybe not interested in so much of the creating the mods, but perhaps managing the mods, distributing the mods, playing with obviously various different mod lists, they've actually added a method now of creating different mod lists, which I think is phenomenal. So let's just quickly go back to the main menu here. You can see that there are these things called playsets. So these are essentially mod lists, for lack of a better term. Create a new playset. We'll call this one Testing Bigly. And then this way, you can add mods to a very specific playtest. So, for example, for me, as a Let's Player, this is phenomenal, because it means I can have a separate installation of the Game of Thrones mod, Elder Kings, Lux Invicta, Historical Immersion Project, whatever mod you want, we can throw into this list, and you can create various different things. For those of you with a bit more modding experience, you could create compatibility patches for specific mod packs and keep that up to date. For me, this is phenomenal. This is incredible, because it means I can swap between, much more simply than I can in CK2, my mods for, say, my own personal projects and for the YouTube series. Quickly pulled up my Crusader Kings II folder here to really hammer this point home about how useful this is. This is my current installation of CK2. I have files absolutely all over the place. We've got archive mods, stuff that I've made at some point, ignore the names. Old mods that I've made that I've wanted to archive away, perhaps to look at another day, or perhaps mods that I've created for a specific other mod that is not compatible with, say, the base game, like, for example, Traits mod, compatibility with the Game of Thrones mod. In here, I have all my different mod installations. So this one, for example, is the current CK2 series that we're doing, the Art of the End Old World Ruler Roulette. We have in here a Beta Avengers mod I've been working on, the Dungeon Master base mod. Now, the reason this one's got a separate folder is because if I try and upload anything else to the workshop without keeping the original folder, it will create a new mod rather than update it. So again, phenomenal new launcher features. I won't go too much into that quite yet. But if I want to change a mod list right now in Crusader Kings 2 as someone who has multiple mod lists, I have to give this a separate name. So let's say, for example, Crusader Kings 2, this is After the End Old World. So we call it something like that. If I then wanted to enable the Dungeon Master mod, I would have to call it mod. Now, you probably think that's quite straightforward until you realize what I've actually got here is, bigger interface, Caesar's books, artifact acquisition. I have a lot of these mods also in After the End. So I've got multiple installations of all the same mods of all different versions because the Steam Workshop can only update in what is obviously most recent. This is going to change that entirely. No longer am I going to need to juggle 500 different folders with 1,000 different versions of 1,000 different mods. You just create a folder, and that's it. And then you can swap between them as much as you like. So you can see here in my initial playset, which is the default mods list, I have the Dungeon Master mod, which I've been... it's not really a Dungeon Master mod, I just gave it that name. But some mods that I've been messing around producing for Crusader Kings III here. That is pretty huge. And it's going to allow, again, so much more streamlined and straightforward. And to be honest, streamlined is very much the name of the game with Crusader Kings III, as you'll see hopefully in the Let's Play that we're doing. But anyway, let me show you some of the actual mod tools that they've given us access to. So the first thing of note, and I did kind of go into this screen earlier, is you have the opportunity to, again, manage mods with your mod list, but you've also got this mod tools option, and this is kind of your CK2 launcher. Bit more straightforward, obviously a lot more indicative of what's actually going on. I know a lot of people were very confused with the CK3 launcher when it would kind of download a mod, but there was no checkbox because it was moving files over from a temporary location, all sorts of confusing things like that. This is very straightforward. Enable, disable all. You've got a remove button, remove from a playset, which is fantastic if you accidentally add the wrong thing. Beyond that, we actually have the ability to create mods and update mods on the fly. This is fantastic, because for those of you, again, who don't really know much about the Crusader Kings II update system, you have to do it from in-game, and you have to hope that the Steam Workshop works, your internet is connected, and more importantly, there are no variations between your updated version and the original version's original mod file. So for someone like me, who's moving around so many different mods, if I move the mod file, or rename it, or make a site alteration, that's it. Steam Workshop now considers that a brand new mod, which was the issue with my traits mod. I had to upload a whole fresh version, rather than being able to update an old one. Massive pain in the ass. They've got this all baked in now, so this is a 10 out of 10 from me immediately with that regard. You can update your thumbnail for the... Well, firstly, you can upload to both either the Paradox Plaza mods page or the Steam Workshop. Paradox mods, again, you've got your description, you've got the game version, which also supports wildcards, by the way, so if I were to do something like that, that means that it is supported in any game version 1.x. That could be 1.7, 1.3, 1.2, whatever, you kind of get the idea. We're currently on 1.01 though, so I'll put that one back. You can upload again to Paradox Mods or Steam Workshop. It doesn't say there's actually a thumbnail for Steam Workshop, but I assume that works the way it did with CK2, where you just drag an icon basically into the mod folder. You can, of course, change the name. Shows you the directory too, which you can actually click on to open the directory. Phenomenal change. You can also, see by this button up here, create a mod from within the game launcher. This is massive, because there was one of my biggest sort of fixes that I always helped people do in the Discord, where we would offer mod support, was helping people with their .mod files. A lot of confusion about, where it should point to, whether you should use path or archive, the names, etc., etc. This is all done for you now. Saves so much of the heavy lifting, so much of the obvious, very simple but easy to miss problems with modding. There might not be an issue with the mod itself, just where the mod is located or what it's pointing to. So this time, for example, I can name a mod, Big Ol' Stinky. You can put spaces in it and whatever else. You can format it however you like with any sort of characters or whatever. So let's go ahead and actually give that a decent name. Big Old Stinky. There we are. Properly case sensitive now. Version, again, this is the mod version rather than the game version. So for this, I wonder if that accepts, oh, there you go, beta. You can say alpha, you could say alpha 0.12, something like that. Again, very useful. With my current version of the Dungeon Master mod up on the Steam Workshop, I've quite literally just, the name of the mod is Dungeon Master brackets open beta. That's not something that is supported in the current CK2 setup. Directory, set a custom directory for it. We'll call it BOS for Big Old Stinky. And this is, of course, version 0.1 of the Big Old Stinky mod. You can also give it tags. Again, allows people to actually find your mods. I assume this will apply to both the Steam Workshop and the Paradox Plaza. Obviously, I can't check because right now we are in a preview build of CK3. The Workshop is currently not up. Paradox Plaza, though, is, and I noticed some naughty boys already uploaded a mod to it. So we've got all sorts of various things you can enable and whatever else there. And there you are. It's quite literally as simple as that to create your mod template, for lack of better word. Now, obviously, that's going to be contentless, but you will actually be able to load that in the game now, which is phenomenal. You can see the management has kicked in there suggests that it is for version 1.0.1, which you can adjust, and then you can upload that straight away to Paradox Mods or Steam Workshop. Though I feel like if they see Rowan D2 Games that loaded big old stinky to the Paradox Workshop and it does nothing, I'll get in trouble. For those of you wondering where that particular folder is on your hard drive, obviously I can only really talk for Windows here and only for my particular documents, but it'll kind of be in your equivalent if you're also on Windows. It is in the same place that Crusader Kings 2 is, that of course being my documents, Paradox Interactive, and then Crusader Kings 3. Little bit of a different folder here to what you've seen in CK2, but don't worry about that too much. The basic layout is the same. CK3 mod, and then there are your files, and then you have the .mod files as well for your various different mods. And there is the one that's generated for us. It's got a descriptor, which will just have basically the description, the tags, and then the .mod file. But that's all it really is. It's just kind of an empty folder. It's a way to get you started in a sort of quick and easy manner that allows it to be managed very, very simply by the Crusader Kings 3 launcher. Again, that's immediately massively above Crusader Kings 2 in regards to kind of simplicity of publishing and mods there. I'm not going to do any specific tutorials about creating mods. You know, we're not going to throw any sort of example things together. However, like I said during the second part, for those of you maybe with a bit more experience, or if you're just completely curious, you can take a look at a mod that I've thrown together. If I can get permission for it, I'll send out an email actually after I finish recording this. I'll put up a copy of the mod somewhere on a cloud storage, Google Drive, something like that you can download and take a look through if you are that curious, if you want to kind of get your hands on things. Obviously, that'll be after the game is released, because this video is going up after the game is released, so, but I'll make sure that that is fine to kind of upload preemptively there to coincide with the release of everything. So, the actual structure is just in files. Again, I won't go into this too deeply, but it is just in folders, and in those folders are text documents, and that is honestly quite as complex as you need it to be with Crusader Kings modding. That applies to both Crusader Kings 2 and Crusader Kings 3. It is just text documents in folders. Sure, there are some variations. You get GUI files, you get graphics files like .dds, but if you want to make gameplay alterations, this is really all you need. Folders and text documents the whole way down. So for the next section, I'll be discussing tools that you'll need, not necessarily need, but tools that I would personally recommend to build Crusader Kings mods. In theory, you don't need anything, because you could make a mod with Notepad, not Notepad++, just regular Notepad that comes with Windows. I assume the same thing applies to Mac and Linux as well, but you don't really need any tools to do that. Obviously, you'd be a lunatic to not use the tools, given that they're free and publicly available. So the two tools I use the most for creating Crusader Kings 2 mods, and the same applies to Crusader Kings 3, the two tools I've used the most so far in creating my Crusader Kings 3 mods, are Notepad++ and Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is the kind of primary thing that you will be using. Let me quickly pull that up and explain exactly what it is. Visual Studio Code is a very, very fancy Notepad, essentially, for lack of a better word. It's a kind of light development engine for coding. Generally, it's used with things like C++, if you're doing a simple C++ application, C#, Python, Java, whatever. It's used for traditional languages. However, an incredible person over on the Visual Studio Marketplace has produced some very, very essential plugins that will make managing and creating mods super straightforward. It has syntax built in, highlighting, that type of thing. And actually, to emphasize this, why don't we very quickly open up one of my Dungeon Master files here so you can see what it looks like when loaded into Visual Studio Code. Now, don't worry if this looks overwhelming so far. It's a lot more simple than it looks here. What I want to highlight is, well, the highlights, funnily enough. The obviously kind of distinctions here, the nice layout, the way it looks is so much more simple than looking at a black and white Notepad document. Definitely highly recommend using this one. The full download links, installation guides to all of the programs I'm going to be showing off here, with the exception of Photoshop for fairly obvious reasons, will be all linked in the description. Everything else besides Photoshop is free, but Photoshop is just kind of an optional. Funnily enough, it's not really used as much as the other program we'll be talking about. Quite simply, to set this up, all you do is you install Visual Studio Code, you go to you press this button, which is your extensions marketplace, and then you look for the tools that you need. Now, I'm personally using this incredible suite by Thomas Bobby, or Bobby. I apologize if I'm messing your name up, but almost every single mod I have built for CK2 has been using this scripting language. So quite simply, all you have to do is type in CW Tools, and that will bring up the Marketplace extension for CW Tools. You click it, you click the install button. When you've installed it, it'll turn into an uninstall button, then you restart the program, and that is quite literally it. It couldn't be any more simple to show that. You hit the install button. When it installs, it will say reload required, and then you simply reload. You don't have to do anything fancy, nothing outside of the program, no file manipulation. Everything is within the GUI of this program. So we've got CW Tool. Now, the other thing I also use is the Paradox syntax highlighting, which will, as it says there, it's got Stellaris grammar, generic Paradox language. This works for CK2, CK3. Stellaris, I have messed around a little bit with it, and I assume the same would apply to EU4, Imperator, etc. Same thing, really. You just simply type in Paradox syntax highlighting. You know it's the right one because of the author. It's this one right there. Uninstall, reinstall, whatever you want to do with it. Reload the program, and then the next time you open up something in Visual Studio, something like, for example, in this situation, the Ruler Designer events, it will look like that. It's very, very simple, very, very straightforward, and very, very user-friendly. I would recommend getting used to, for those of you who haven't really used an IDE before, a development program before, just getting used to some of the controls, some of the things you can do with it. For example, placing a curly brace will also place the opposite, learn how to tab properly and format correctly. Just follow the basic Paradox files. You'll be absolutely fine with that, but I won't get too heavy into this one. We'll talk about that more in a future episode where I actually kind of show you guys how to create an introductory mod. Visual Studio Code, like I said, you need it. If you're making CK2 mods, I highly recommend it. I couldn't think of anything else I would rather use than Visual Studio Code. The only caveat to that is I use Notepad++ for a couple of reasons. I use it for searching files because it is slightly faster than Visual Studio Code if you are searching through many, many files to look for maybe a particular line of code that you want to copy or something like that. I also use it for handling localization. So for those of you who don't know what localization is, those are the words that appear on the screen to the player in their language. So obviously for mine it's English. You can set it to Spanish, German, French. I believe simplified Chinese is in Crusader Kings III. Don't quote me on that one, but I did notice the folder when I was looking through it. You can set that up for however you like. Now that is all I really use Notepad++ for. And again, to highlight that, let me just quickly reopen my Crusader Kings III folder, which I very stupidly closed down. Let's go into this one. Let's go into mod and then the Dungeon Master. Localization is very straightforward. Now, CK2, this isn't super relevant, so again, this is more for the experienced modders. CK2 localization files were in .xml format, which is why I used Notepad++. This time they are in YAML. Now, YAML is actually also supported by Visual Studio, as far as I know. Which, if the case, you know, you might not even need Notepad++. There you go. You can just open it up in this, and it's very, very straightforward. This is just kind of plain text. It's very simple to add localization. Won't go into it too deep. You quite literally correlate what you're saying to the code. So, say, for example, the title of this event is Ruler Designer 001.t. You would simply write that. You put your 0 to show that it is kind of a new line, and then type what you want in the quotations. It's literally that simple. It's much more simple than CK2, in fact. And you can sort of see the languages we've got here. Simplified Chinese, Russian, Korean there. Anyway, not too relevant right now, but you could do everything with Visual Studio Code. However, again, I would recommend Notepad++ for maybe searching through your entire mod if you say, can't find a variable, need to confirm a flag or something like that. Always good to have that as well. There are two other programs I personally use for Crusader Kings II modding, which will probably become relevant to Crusader Kings III modding when it starts to pick up some steam, when we've got a bit of documentation, when we've got a wiki with access to and forum posters, etc. Then these two programs will also come in handy. These are for your more advanced user, I would say. These are two programs that fit very different roles. We've got GitHub Desktop, which is useful if you're working in a team of people. Obviously, it can clone, again, this is more advanced stuff, GitHub repositories and push them back to the origin so that you and a team can kind of collaborate with your work and kind of correlate what you're doing with one another, merge things safely without overwriting. Not so relevant. Those of you who know what GitHub Desktop is will understand what I'm saying. But for everyone else, it's really not too relevant if you're just making a very straightforward, say, religion or culture mod. Don't worry about that one too much. The other one is the Audax Validator. Now, the Audax Validator is something that I've not really spoken about much before, and I really wish I would have, because it would have solved a lot of people's problems. The Audax Validator is a program that was uploaded to the Paradox forums a very, very long time ago, from what I remember, which is essentially a debugging program for Crusader Kings III, EU4, I believe it supports Sengoku. In fact, I think we've got a list here. Yeah, Victoria, March of the Eagles, Europa Universalis, etc., etc., which essentially allows you to validate a mod you have created with all sorts of various options. Right now, we've got it loaded in for the Dungeon Master mod. If I hit validate, it will go through, or not, because I've broken a lot of things. Again, harkening back to my CK2 installation woes of constantly having to copy and paste orders. Anyway, you can hit the validate button. Very simple to set up. You simply point it to your directory, you point it to your mod directory, you hit validate, and it will say, you've done this wrong, you missed a bracket here, you've messed this one up. This one I'm only going to mention in passing. I'm going to leave it there with that one, because the Audex Validator obviously won't support Crusader Kings III yet. Don't be surprised if, in the future, it gets updated to support Crusader Kings III. Keep an eye out for that one, but don't worry about either of these two right yet. These are maybe more complicated things when you get a bit of experience. Final two programs I would recommend for graphics modding this time around for Crusader Kings II and, by extent, Crusader Kings III, because they tend to use the same file formats for the most part, are Adobe Photoshop and Paint.net. Photoshop, what do I need to say? It's good for making digital art. That's about it. Now, Paint.net is not optional. This is mandatory if you're going to be creating graphics for Crusader Kings II or Crusader Kings III. Paint.net handles files like .dds, .tga. There are other programs that do it, but in my opinion, Paint.net is not only free, completely free, not just like a trial, not limited, it is completely free, publicly available. More importantly, it is relatively simple to use. It's like any other. It'll probably take a little getting used to, but if you've used Photoshop before, it'll look more than familiar. You've got layers, you've got a palette, you've got your tools, and this can handle the file types that are used in Crusader Kings, because it doesn't use kind of standard JPEG PNGs. Outside of very, very rare situations, almost all of the gameplay elements you're going to see will most likely be a .dds or a .tga file. You need Paint.net or another external program to be able to handle those. Again, I would recommend this one. It's what I've used for everything. Generally, I use Photoshop to actually draw them because I'm personally more familiar with Photoshop, and then I will import them over to Paint.net to save them as the necessary file formats for Crusader Kings. With all of these tools at your disposal, you'll be able to create whatever mod you want, realistically. The caveat to that, of course, is in Crusader Kings III, there are 3D assets in the game. Character models. Obviously, there was in CK2 as well, but now all of the characters in the game are 3D assets. I'm going to have to look into that one. I will do a follow-up video on that one. I have very limited experience in modeling. Very small amount from a game from about 20 years ago using a program called Milkshape. So I am no use in this scenario, I'm afraid. I'll look that one up. I'll get some experience. I'll do a follow-up video. You have my word on that one. So you know what tools I use, and I know from experience a lot of other modders that I've spoken to use as well. With just Visual Studio Code and Paint.net, you can create a whole slew of mods for Crusader Kings 2, or now, of course, Crusader Kings 3 as well. Let's say you're armed. You've downloaded those programs. You're sitting, you're ready. You're thinking, Mr. Streamer, where do I go from here? Well, let's talk a little bit about the file structure of Crusader Kings, both with Crusader Kings 2 and 3, funnily enough. There are actually some variations between Crusader Kings 2 folders and Crusader Kings 3 folders. I'll just treat this as Crusader Kings 2, and again, for those of you with some modding experience, for those more advanced users, I'll talk about the variations between the structure, file types, and actual events and things like that towards the end, and sort of different things just to be aware of in advance. Simply put, like I said before, everything is in a particular folder. Almost all of your core gameplay elements, assets, whatever you want to refer to them as, things that you can then use in events and decisions are going to be found within your common folder. This is anything from traits. Why don't I open up the base game one just to show that very quickly. In here, you'll have things like achievements, you'll have bookmarks, you'll have buildings, casus belli, cultures, religions, all sorts of everything that the game uses, essentially. This is things that anything can call upon, hence why it's called the common folder. A lot of you eagle-eyed people, for those of you who have done some CK2 modding, will notice that the decisions folder is actually in common now. Why they've done that, I don't know, but there it is. I mean, it makes a bit more sense being in common, as far as I'm concerned. You also have some other folders of note. For example, GFX is your graphics folder. Localization is your as I talked about, your kind of language, what's being shown on the screen to the player that correlates to the code. So hunting focus, business focus, whatever else. The best way to look at it is that all of these folders, and you can use all of these for the most part, in your own mod as well. Again, we're looking at kind of the base CK3 folder here. All of these will have different file types in them. Common will almost entirely, with the exception of maybe some Lua files. That's definitely true of CK2, perhaps not of CK3, but with the exception of some other Lua files, will just have .text files in there. Events will have just .text files in there, with the exception of an info file, which is basically to teach modders. GUI files will be generally .gui. Again, you can open that in Visual Studio Code, you can open that in Notepad, so even though it's a different file format, you've still got the tools to manage it. GFX folders will contain bitmaps, they'll contain the 3D models, of course, for CK3. They'll contain the DDS files that I talked about earlier that you'll need to use Paint.net with. All of these folders basically contain a particular file type or do a particular task in the game. It's very straightforward when you've learned it. I know it might look overwhelming now, but obviously if you want to make a sound effect, that goes in the sound folder. You might have to do some other defining elsewhere. If you wanted to add an achievement, there's an achievements folder for that. You might think to yourself, boy, I want to add a fancy culture to make my character a super overpowered anime princess. You simply go into Common and into the cultures folder. Very straightforward. It's innovative and simple when you get the hang of it. Again, I know it might look overwhelming, but everything is just a folder structure. You don't really need to do too many complicated things to actually get files into the game. We've talked about the actual structure of the mod and the files which are going to be loaded into the game. Let's talk about the file that loads the files, and that is, of course, the .mod file. I've talked about this extensively before if you've seen any of my other previous modding series. If you've ever heard me talk about any CK2 mod, I'm sure I've complained about a .mod file at some stage. The .mod file tells the launcher, both for CK2 and CK3, where the mod is, what you should load, and some other specifics about it. In this scenario, we're talking about the Dungeon Master mod. Again, it's not a Dungeon Master, I just called it that because I was maybe a little bit too ambitious. This will tell the launcher what type of mod it is. It's got character interactions, it's got gameplay. It will tell it the name of the mod. This is what will appear in the launcher. The supported versions of the game, in this case, the base game, and the path to the mod itself, which is new, kind of, for Crusader Kings III. Before it was like archive, it didn't have a full file path, etc. It doesn't matter too much. This is the kind of essential other part to any mod. Like I said, you've got the folders of files, but this is essential. Without this, the mod can't load. So just bear that in mind if you are distributing mods to other people, that you do need to include the Dungeon Master.mod or the .mod file. This goes straight in your mod folder. And of course, to install mods, probably should mention that, but I kind of hope it's implicit at this point. To do that, you simply go to your documents, Paradox Interactive, Crusader Kings II. If you're downloading from, say, ModDB or somewhere other than the Steam Workshop Paradox forums, drag it in here. Make sure that it is folder and .mod or zip archive and .mod. Simple as that. Couldn't be any easier. .mods have to be on the top level. That's as much as you need to worry about. And that, I think, will probably sum up the kind of very basics of creating a mod, understanding the structure. Let me quickly show you where you can get access to the base game files so that you can basically do some digging around, kind of teach yourself how these things work. If you see an event in-game, is how I basically taught myself to mod CK2. I saw an event in-game and I thought, I wonder how that works. I wonder what kind of outcomes there are for that event. I remember, I think one of the first ones I did it for was the Hermetic Society lab. I was like, how is it you make the best lab? And kind of learned from that, reverse engineering, how to apply that. And then I thought, well, what happens if we change certain things about it? So this is, of course, a pre-release version of Crusader Kings II. I imagine it'll be the same for the most part, and will almost certainly be in the same installation. Steam Apps Common, Crusader Kings III. This is slightly different than Crusader Kings II. The actual game files are within the game folder. This will look very familiar to those of you who have done CK2 modding before or have messed around with the CK2 folder. In here is going to be all of your... basically the best tutorial you could ever hope for. You want to make a culture. Let's assume that. You go into the common folder. You go into the cultures folder. You go into the cultures folder because there are different cultural changes to CK3. Go watch some gameplay if you're interested in what eras, innovations, cultural names, etc. are. This has got a list of all of your cultures. So, for example, if you go to North Germanic, you're going to have Norse, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, etc. If we go to West Germanic, you're going to have German, Dutch, English, etc. These are the folders that you can, these are the files I should say, that you can of course look through to get an idea of what you want to build. If you want to build a Roman-esque culture, because it's Crusader Kings, and the only time period that ever exists is of course Rome. So it has immediately opened it up in Visual Studio Code here. You can see some of the highlighting going on. But let's say, for example, I want to find Roman. God, I hope it's in Latin.txt, and I hope there is a Roman culture. If we do Control F and Roman, there it is. We found it immediately. Control F is of course find, edit, find, view, find, or however you want to do it, view, search in this situation, to hunt down what you're looking for. If you want to make a Roman culture, you could quite simply just copy this, look through. You can see that it's defined as Roman. Its graphical cultures that have access to are Byzantine clothing and the Eastern unit packs. You can see some cadet dynasty names, for example, Julio Claudian, Flavian, and Nerva and Tonin, etc. Dynasty names, you've got male names defined there, female names. Again, for people who've done CK2, this probably looks identical. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is identical. Besides this, you've got ethnicities, Mediterranean. I don't know what that is, but that's the fun of it. It's all about exploring and kind of learning how things work, especially until we get a wiki, like I said. But this is very straightforward to kind of copy if you wanted to do that. You could lift this, put it into a new file, see if it works. Roman 2.0.mod. Very simple. And again, this is your cheat sheet. This is your shortcut. And in certain situations, the devs as well will have these .info files. They expect you to come and look at this stuff. And the .info files will have tutorials, strangely enough, as it'll say here. Mercenary names in coat of arms that can be used by mercenaries of this culture. You've got color, the color of the culture, e.g. used on the map. Modifier effects on all characters of the culture. This, name of culture, first culture group gives +1 diplomacy to characters. They have given you everything you could need to create what you need here. And chances are there is a .info file in almost every single one of these folders. Everything you could ever need to know is in that. So go and hunt those down if you're looking for some very basic but fairly concise and clear tutorialization. Dig around. Break things. I encourage you to break things. That's how we learn. You can always just reinstall it from Steam, right? It's not going to do any permanent damage. That, to be frank, for a kind of introduction for those of you who have no previous experience, is really all I've got, because I've only had essentially a few days to work on this. Probably went on holiday at a bad time, I will admit. But I've only had a few days to really start reverse engineering things for myself, working on my own mods for myself, getting a hang of actually what's going on. Like I said, this is going to be the first episode of a hopefully long list of episodes diving into Crusader Kings III modding and content. I will hopefully get, maybe within a week after we've done some exploration, maybe after the kind of patches, if they're necessary, come out after the game stabilized. Everybody's got hang of it. We know the mechanics of obviously I barely even know the Crusader Kings III base mechanics right now, so me trying to tutorialize and give mods is a pretty poor idea when I don't really know what's going on in the game particularly. So let's give it time for the dust to settle. After that, I'll have a mods kind of an example mod produced, and I'll show you guys. Maybe we'll do a culture and religion mod as the first thing we do. How about that? So you guys can create your own Roman 2.0, Super Rome, Maximus, Bigus. You know where I was going with that. Anyway, for those of you who are here for maybe a bit more of a deep dive, for some comparison between Crusader Kings 2 and Crusader Kings 3 in terms of code, structure, that type of thing, let's get straight on it. Let's take a look. I think probably the simplest way to go about this, and I'm doing this completely by the seat of my pants. I haven't got any plans for this one. Not that I have for the entire video, to be honest. This has all been off the top of the dome piece, so I apologize if it's terrible. But we are just going to be looking at some of the files I've produced. Why don't I show you what this mod does before we continue on, huh? I think that would make some sense. Let's go into CK2 very briefly. Now, a word of note, I am going to be showing off the debug mode for Crusader Kings 3, which is this incredible tool they've added that allows you to kind of dynamically observe AI to see tiles at a glance. Think of it as char info, but on ramped up on cucumber paste, for those of you who get the meaning. Ramped up to 11. It's a game changer. Not a game changer. Well, it is quite literally a game changer because we're going to be using it to make mods. Quite literally a game changer in this situation. I'm not entirely sure why, but I've been homing in on the Duke of Aquila for testing this mod. And as you're going to see, I kind of feel sorry for the poor guy because this mod has some side effects to allow it to work. So we've got a couple of options here. Fresh start and reroll character, obviously both not base game there. Fresh start, very simply, allow you to start a fresh dynasty and wipe the slate clean. You will remain a member of the de Horteville family. A new character will be spawned of the dynasty, which you will then play as because it kills everyone else in the dynasty. So, It was probably the quickest way I could think of doing it. Now, bear that in mind, because there's a really cool way that CK3 has added to allow you to scope to a predetermined list of characters, quite literally. So, let's do it. Let's reset the dynasty, and let me show you kind of how this works. This is kind of how I thought I would do it. Now, bear in mind, you can set the character's pose, who appears over here, a left and right side, the background image, the sound effects. You can set the frame up here, which I'd kind of argue is very similar to kind of setting the highlight on a narrative frame in CK2. You get a little icon, so this one's a realm icon because it is affecting the realm. Sometimes a fresh start is all you need. Sometimes the easiest way to achieve that is to kill absolutely everybody you know and love, all of them, scorched earth. We can say that's just horrible, no immediate effects, but the decision does become unavailable. Or, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Now, I just say no immediate effects because of the way I've created this, where it pings out an event. Specifically, it does that and kills every single member of your dynasty. Besides, of course, a new character that is just spawned in. You can see there that the under the has happened box, you is the new father of a new character. That's just probably poor coding on my side why that tooltip is messed up. But again, it could be the preview build. Probably subject to change in the future. Again, it is a preview build. What will happen? You die. Oh no, we're dead. But now we are playing as a randomly generated character, Duke Drogo, and the slate is wiped clean. We have one living member, which is the heir of our previous guy. To scope to as it is slightly different. This character also spawned in with random stats, and I'm going to be honest with you right now, I've never seen them spawn in so powerful as they've spawned in right now. Fecund, comely, robust, and intelligent. What a guy. Open, terrain expert, tough soldier, and stubborn. Maybe it's a little bit overpowered, I might need to nerf that one, but of course the second effect of wiping the slate clean, you basically pick a dynasty, you create a new character in it. Very straightforward. The other thing I added is the reroll character option. Now this one, if I didn't close the bloody thing off, you fool. Now that's interesting as well, that you can just esc out of... there is kind of a close option on decisions, which is quite nice, rather than being kind of behooved into it. Roll new traits to your character or swap gender, religion, or culture on a whim. Now, this is unfinished. I was actually working on this just before I started working on this video. Then I realized, oh shit, the game's out tomorrow. So I figured I'd better start actually working on the series that I agreed to do. So, let's hit the begin rerolls button. And you can see that I've come up with some scripted effects here. So that I've got a scripted effect that will remove all previous traits. It'll also reset stress. One of the reasons I did the reset stress is because we did wipe out an entire dynasty, which, naturally, when you watch your entire family die in one fell swoop, tends to be somewhat disturbing. Even if you do get some land out of it. So it resets the stress there, and it also removes all traits from our guy and puts him back. Well, all traits within reason. So, inheritable traits, like fecund, comely, robust, intelligent, those you'll keep because they are... genetic traits. And I could do it so you can re-roll the genetic traits again. In fact, I might add that because that's kind of interesting. So we've got the next event that leads on to is this one here. And I've kind of explained the mechanics behind it when we dive into the file. But just know, you get given 5 re-rolls. And every time you use one of those rerolls, it subtracts a reroll. So it's up to you whether you want to push it a little bit further and end up with a worse character and then have to reroll again and waste 2 rerolls potentially, or whether you want to stick. It's supposed to be a little bit gamey. I might create a super overpowered version, like a ruler designer unlock, so to speak, for CK3, at least until we get the ruler designer official update. So we've got a fair and sharp diplomat, generate diplomacy-based character, a warrior songs written off, generate a martial-based character, a realm builder, unrivaled in splendor, generate a stewardship-based character, or, of course, a knife in the dark, an intrigue-based character there. So if we go fair and strong diplomat, that will give you some random traits that are associated with diplomacy. He actually got very lucky. This guy ended up with generous, honest, gregarious, and he got a level 2 education trait there. Adequate bargainer. So maybe not the best education, but he got some great traits to make up for it. 16 diplomacy. This guy's great. This guy's really good. And maybe you would be like, no, I'm happy as I am, and that will lock you in, and you'll be able to start as this character. I thought that was quite a nice solution to not having a ruler designer. Not hyper overpowered, because you are left at the kind of beck and call of random nature. But if we want to begin another randomizer, that will remove the trait. Now, it is worth noting that it's not dynamic in Crusader Kings III. Maybe they'll change that in the future. Maybe it's just the preview build. But to actually see your traits change, you do need to close the character screen and reopen it. I think that's barely even worth mentioning. It's such a non-issue. Anyway, why don't we go for a warrior songs written up this time and see how we end up. Now, this localization doesn't work. I don't know why. I couldn't figure it out. We got actually quite unlucky this time. Our guy only got brilliant strategist, but he didn't get any personality traits. So he's got high martial, but really nothing else that defines him as a person. So that's worth bearing in mind. We can bring in the randomization again, reset him, and let's go for a stewardship character, see what we get. Oh, cool. We got Midas Touch and Diligent that time, which is quite nice. So we are running out of rerolls here. If we were to do it twice more, we would basically get locked out. The only option at that point would be I am happy as I am, thank you. So again, it's a case of whether you want to take it further. You know, personally, I think out of all of them, that first diplomacy character we got was insane. To get those 3 traits and level 2 education would have been phenomenal. He had great all-round stats. This guy, quite heavy on the stewardship, but not much else, you know? So I'm going to say I'm happy as I am, thank you. And there he is. One Duke Drogo II of Apuila. See the notifications where things are kicking in there. And that's essentially how that works. And then, assuming I've set it up right, that decision should no longer be available. And it's not. They're gone now. So that would be your characters. So you want to start a fresh Let's Play. Say you want to start a fresh series. That was what you would have access to. Anyway, that was what I thought would be the kind of simplest and most also useful mod to me to kind of get that fresh start going there. Let me show you what's going on behind the scenes then and how this actually works. Now that I come to think of it, I don't think I saved some of the changes before I started this video. So I'll kind of talk about what is missing and how we can fix it. Why not? So for those of you with some modding experience then, you'll notice first and foremost that the decisions folder is inside common now. You might have also noticed when I was briefly clicking around the Crusader Kings III folders, inside folders are more folders, whereas previously events were just one big list. You can now categorize them, which I think is phenomenal. It keeps it very straightforward. It means that you can split things up. It means you keep it as complicated or as streamlined as you want, because you've got folders to actually organize it. As far as I recall, I even saw folders inside folders. Yeah. Activities. You go to feast activity, hunt activity. You've got folders within folders within folders, which for, again, organization, as far as I'm concerned, is a phenomenal change, and I'm a big fan of that one. Let's go to the start of the mod then, the decisions. This is going to look very, very similar to CK2, but I'm sure you'll notice some caveats. Let me also zoom in here. I've got to remember the bloody buttons in. Oh, a little bit too much? Is that a little bit too aggressive? Let's zoom out a little bit. Right, there we are. So you can kind of see some differences here immediately between Crusader Kings II and Crusader Kings III in regards to decision. First and foremost, reset decision. I mean, this is the same picture rather than what was it in CK2? GFX? I don't remember. But this will just show the picture that is going on with the decision. That's the kind of decision icon, so to speak, in Crusader Kings 2. They're obviously a lot more complex in CK3. They're a much larger icon. You've got a description, very straightforward, identical to Crusader Kings 2. That will show the actual description when you click on it, when it pops up, the kind of decision menu. That's, I guess, the big difference, isn't it? In CK2, you didn't have that. You just had a kind of question mark to show the conditions, and then the click will show you what happened. This will actually pop up, and it's kind of a mini-event, kind of an introduction to what's actually going to happen. So you got reset dynasty decision _ description, and then a tooltip as well, which when you hover over it, it will say something humorous, which I'm sure I wrote something hilarious there as well. AI check interval is, of course, how frequently the AI should do this. I set this to AI no, so I just blanked that out. But I left it in to show you guys that that is, you know, the same as CK2. AI check interval is how frequently the AI should check. A high number means they're going to check it all the bloody time. Or is it a low number? I don't remember in hindsight now that I've just said that. I said it with such confidence too. But that is basically the same as CK2. You know how it be. This is the big difference. Rather than having allow and potential, which is how decisions are defined in CK2. Potential is what it has to show up, and then allow is what it is to actually be fired, for you to actually click that and launch it. So, for example, if you are, you know, if you have Byzantium and the HRE, there's restore the borders of Rome. Now, you can only see that if you are the emperor, but you can't always click it immediately, right? And that's, of course, the difference between potential and allow. This time around, you just have is shown, which has... You know, we have to be a ruler, we have to not be AI, and we have to not have the global variable dynasty reset. This is worth pointing out. There are, as far as I can tell, no global flags in Crusader Kings III. Instead, global variables take the position of global flags. Bear in mind, we have global flags and global variables in CK2 that essentially do the same thing, because you could just set a variable to 1. That's the equivalent of it just being true, right? Quite literally in terms of Boolean. So they've simplified it by not having global flags and global variables. It's one system now, which seems unnecessary, but does make a lot of sense when you kind of consider it the way I just explained. So you must not have the global variable dynasty reset being true. And that's how it works. It is a Boolean system in CK3 in that the global variable, when you click it, is set to yes. Now you could set that to 1, and then you could check if the global variable doesn't equal 1, but that's basically what this does, right? Let's go through it again a little bit slower. So, again, that's how the global variables work now instead of global flags. You've got a cooldown this time, which I actually quite like this. in CK3, sorry, in CK2, you could add like a character modifier, a character flag. Character modifiers were basically how it was done for the most part. Maybe, say, for example, feasts, there were restrictions on months, which of course you can still do in this, but this has a very straight, very simple, very straightforward cooldown. Set as many years as you want. I just set this one to years 9999. It's not going to show up anyway because you'll have the global variable, but again, I kept this in just to illustrate it to you guys, to be able to show you that this is an option. Much more straightforward than Crusader Kings II as well. Is valid showing failures only? Is available? Yes. Basically, this is similar to something you had in CK3. Sorry, in CK2. God, this is going to get confusing. This is similar to something you had in CK2, where if you didn't have the conditions for a tooltip, you could hide for the player the things that they already had, so they didn't have to worry about that. And this is the same thing. But because it's always available, then is available is yes. But you could add anything, you know? Is valid showing failures only? You could say age equals 10. Now it's only available. No, you don't do that. You would do that, and then if you were lower than the age of 10, it would show, because you've got this enabled, that you are not above the age of 10. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm trying to do this on the fly, so I'm confusing myself. Then we've got effects. Same as CK2 once again. This will set that global variable to be true, so it can't be fired again. This will trigger an event. In this situation, it is the reset din.001 events. Points, events kind of pointing works the same as it did in CK2. You set a namespace, you set your namespace, obviously in that situation is reset din, as I'll show off in a second, and then you have event numbers. Very straightforward. Custom tooltips work a little bit easier than CK2, so the CK2 syntax, just as a reminder, is that, so custom tooltip and then text, which is what I tried immediately. I tried as much CK2 code as I could, worked out what wasn't working, and then replaced it with CK3 code, which obviously I found by going through the files. This is a lot more straightforward. You just do custom tooltip equals rather than having to throw in text and things like that. AI potential, so what the AI needs to fulfill before they can take part in that. Always know, again, you don't even need to include this, but I've removed that, and then the AI will do this. Is the chance for them to actually do that. Now, this is a little bit complicated, and I know there are a lot of people who are confused about this, especially beginning modders, about how this works. So the potential is whether or not they can do it. This is whether or not they will do it, and this is how often they will check to see if they can do it. Does that make sense? So if all of those line up, if the stars align, then they'll obviously go forward with that one. Second option, very similar. Reroll character. Again, I've left the cooldown in just as a showing thing, and valid features, etc. This is all pretty much identical there. So that's how you do decisions. Very similar to CK2 with some minor subtle changes that do need to be taken into account. Otherwise, it will scream at you as it screamed at me. Please, mummy, no more CK2 code, it said. I'm a big boy now. Let's take a look at the actual events then. So this is the, well, let's go to the starting event rather than going to the ruler designer so I can show you chronologically as I showed it, obviously, in the gameplay there. So we've got namespace, reset din, like I said, identical to CK2. Very similar to CK2. However, the syntax of event order is slightly, I should say the event order rather than syntax, is slightly different. Syntax is the same. Character event, narrative event, whatever. But in this situation, you would, in CK2, obviously wrap it in a character event first, right? This time around, you define what type of event it is inside the event, which is so much better. That just makes so much more sense. So, character event, we want it to pop up for the character. It's a character event. Makes a lot of sense. Title, again, very straightforward. Reset din.001.t. Now, I'm following the Paradox style of formatting for titles descriptions. This is how they've done it in their events. So, event namespace, event code, up to, I guess, 9,999. You could probably go beyond that, but I didn't really see the point. And then .t for title and .desc for the description. Description also very straightforward. I assume you can have triggered descriptions. I haven't actually tested it. We'll go and take a look at the files, actually, and see if that's true, or whether that's just wild speculation. Let's go game. Let's go events. Let's go and take a look at something. Actually, what I did do earlier. Here's one I prepared earlier. I dragged all the events into a big events folder so I could very quickly take a look at what's going on here. So why don't we control F, and why don't we go, should we say trigger, and see if we can find a description with a trigger in it very quickly. Let's go ahead and bring up all. There's obviously going to be a shitload. There you are. So, this case, we've got a description. We've got description is martial chivalry.1 opening. Then I'll check the first valid. Oh, that's really interesting. So the first valid triggered description. So this description here will appear as well if you have prowess less than your dual opponent's prowess. That's personal combat, right? So this will, I assume, appear, and it will say, you're about to get into a fight. This is going to be a fun fight. But if your prowess is less than your opponent's prowess, this is going to be, a hard fight. Or, if that is invalid, this is basically your if-else, or else-if, or just else, I guess, in this situation. It would take you down to the martialchivalry.easy fight. So it will say, it's an easy fight, because of course, I mean, it's binary, right? If your prowess is greater than your opponent's prowess, of course you want to show the easy fight option. So that's much more straightforward, again, than CK2. There is a lot of code that I think is a lot more simple. There are some things that are very different and would just need to be learned, unfortunately. Things like, getting onto it right now, the theme. You know, I talked about this before when we were actually in game, and I kind of liken this to the frames of the interface. So narrative frames in CK2, narrative frame religion, intrigue, diplomacy, whatever. It would just change the color of the outline. Most common examples, say, for example, is when you get immortality. If you pick the martial quest, it'll outline them all in red. If you pick the learning quest, it'll outline them all in white. You know, whatever is the color that associates to that. This one is slightly different in that it doesn't just outline it, but it also brings up the little picture too. So the realm. I don't know what other themes are available. There might be things other than just the 5 primary sets. There might be family, seduction, plotting, whatever. But again, without a wiki, without true documentation, it's going to be a pain in the ass to try and work that out. But you could just control F all the files if you really felt like it. You can have left portrait, right portrait. I believe I even saw top, bottom portraits, or like top left, top right. Why don't we find that very quickly and answer that question? We could portrait and find all. See what we can pull up. There you are. So we've got left portrait. We have right portrait. I'm pretty sure I saw top right and top left. Yes, there you go. Lower right portrait, and I assume lower left portrait would also apply as well. So maximum of 4 characters appearing. How you would do that in CK2 is, of course, you would have to send the event from, or use the show portrait code to make that appear. I've done that on tooltips. Say, for example, the Game of Thrones mod, when you're looking for dragons, we'll show the dragons on the tooltip. That's generally how you do that. This time, you just define it. You can set a character, so this case is root. Now, worth noting, root is all lowercase in CK3 rather than CK2. And then an animation associated with them. Very straightforward. So you want to make your own animations, that's a lot more complicated. Many different personality types. Again, when we get full documentation on the wiki, this is going to be night and day. It's going to be so much more simple. Immediate, play a music cue. In this case, music cue, epic sacral moment. You can actually do this in Crusader Kings II, but I didn't notice many mods that actually did it. One good example of a mod in Crusader Kings II is one of my mods. The Rule of Roulette mod, which we threw together recently, actually plays a music cue on the immediate because you're skipping over the death event to play the death music to kind of, you know, trigger that, oh, I've actually kind of died, and make it a bit more obvious. This one is actually done quite frequently in CK3. This particular one is, I think, when you reform Rome. I just grabbed that one because I thought it would be epic. Literally. Options. Again, very straightforward. If you've done CK2 modding, this will look night and day. You just put an option. You put a name. In this case, option A. Option B. Option... What was this one? Reset the dynasty. So this was a way to cancel it if you wanted to back out, if you pressed it by accident, whatever else. That will do nothing. But it will be removed from the decision tree. Or alternatively, you press the slay button, and then it will slay some characters. Now, this is one of the first cool effects I've seen well, I mean, it's all kind of cool, but in CK3 modding, this is one of the first new features that I can see a lot of applications for, and those are lists. So rather than having to do dynamic scoping, so rather than saying in CK2 the way I would have done this, if I wanted to scope to all my dynasty members and kill them, you'd have had to go any dynasty member. And that is generally quite slow, as scoping to any large amount of characters would be. If you do any character, of course, the game will shit itself in CK2. But in this one, you can actually define lists whenever you want, right? So, and you can also call lists whatever you want. You can save scopes of huge characters. Otherwise, if you wanted to save a scope of, say, 10 dynasty members in CK2, you would have to mark them with a flag, save them as event targets, 10 separate event targets, do something like that, maybe go for a particular trait, I don't really know. But there is multiple different ways to do it, but never anything as streamlined as this. So this one is obviously the follow-up event, theme round. Again, you've got your character, Root, appearing as a left portrait with a bold personality, because he's about to be slain. Plays the music. Every close or extended family member. So we're going to our kind of dynasty here. And then as a fallback, I also did every dynasty member, just to ensure that I was getting all of the shit. Limit is, again, same as CK2, not has the character flag final dynast. So what happens is, when I actually had this in a different order, I've only just moved this at the top, so this is not really necessary anymore. However, when it creates the character for you to play as, when we've reset the dynasty, it will add a character flag final dynast to that. So just as a kind of a fallback to make sure that we're not killing off the other character, we want to ensure that he's not scoped, and more importantly, we want to make sure he's not added to a list of die stinky. I'm very professional. And that will do that for all Dynasty members as well as extended and close family members. That will do wives as well, and things like that. Spouses, I should say. So there you are. That's how the list system works. Now, that list you can manipulate however you like, as you would with any character scope or any group of character scopes in CK2. Obviously, in this one, we are killing them dead. So I'll show that in a second. We've got a hidden effect of creating a character. You don't really need to hide that, I guess, too much. But the employer is Root, means that they'll appear in Root's court. Root obviously being the player. Again, same as CK2. Now, one of the big differences when creating custom characters between CK2 and CK3 is the character templates are used a lot more frequently. They did exist in CK2. Things like create new steward, things like create new diplomat for the employee council options, create new smith, create Chinese diplomat, etc. There were character templates, but they weren't very frequently used, and to be honest, it was a lot easier to quite simply create a character dynamically in the event and just kind of dump it when it's done, right? This time, though, you can create predetermined templates. It's going to be really, really helpful for total conversion mods that are creating, I don't know, a horde of Daedra, for example, a bunch of dragons in Game of Thrones. You just do dragon template. Makes it a lot more simple. You don't have to limit certain traits from certain characters spawning in. Quite useful. Random traits in this situation are set to no because, of course, you're going to customize it. There are certain random traits added, as you'll see down here. Anyway, I don't want to get too much. Saving the scope as Final Dynast. That is very, very similar to CK2. The CK2 syntax will, of course, be save events targets as, and then you would do Final Dynast. That's how it would work in CK2. In CK3, it's obviously much more straightforward. Save scope as, rather than save event target as. And then you can scope to that whenever the hell you want by simply using the scope command. You do scope, Final Dynast. And of course in CK2, it would be events target, Final Dynast. So that's a bit more, Final Dynast. So that's a bit more straightforward. Rather than having to juggle event targets, just juggle scopes, which makes sense because the whole game is based around scopes anyway, right? Add character flags rather than set character flags. I believe clear character flag rather than being CLR character flag as it was in Crusader Kings II is actually now verbatim. So it's clear character flag, which is much better. Or it might be remove or something like that. But it's no longer shorthand kind of console commandy style thing there. Again, add character flag rather than set character flag. Makes a bit more sense in my opinion. And then the dynasty is defined as root as well to ensure that it spawns with your dynasty. You'll find that the character creation, from what I can tell, at a very cursory glance, is very, very similar to Crusader Kings II's. Then we've got, for the actual scopes themselves, you can see here I'm setting father, setting mother. In CK2, you can do the same thing, really makes no difference. But I'm making the dynast, mother and father root. It's the simplest way to make them a family member. Unnecessary, because the dynasty was also root, but it's a nice way to ensure a fallback if you have, like, Cavalcade succession, something weird like that you're remaining landed, or some other weird thing, I don't know, seniority. It's just a fallback. Don't worry about it. Don't put too much brains power into it, because I certainly didn't. Random list is, again, identical to Crusader Kings II. This random list, for those of you who've seen it, has an equal chance to add any of the following virtues. Those aren't virtues. Lustful, chaste, wrathful, diligent, impatient, arrogant, humble, gregarious. Just added a random list of traits by the looks of it. What a strange boy. Yeah, I did. So various virtues or vices. And then random list here, adding various different personality traits. Honest, ambitious, just, cynical, zealous, compassionate, stubborn. We've got intellectual traits. There's a chance to get nothing at all there. I need to make this a bit more straight, don't I? Because that last character we had was way too overpowered. So I'm going to do something like that. So you've got a kind of 50% chance to gain one of the physiques. Anywhere between 1 to 3. I didn't want it to be super OP, so we've got that. And that is, of course, kind of a +1 to everything, +3 to everything, quick and genius. Similarly, you've got kind of your basic one, strong, really strong. They've actually expanded on that like I did in my traits mod. Maybe they stole it. Evidently not, but this has got varying levels of good and bad physique. So it goes between -3, -2, -1 to +1 to 3, but obviously that correlates to different amount of traits. Obviously, physical good 3 is actually a +5 to all the stats, so hopefully you kind of get what I'm getting out there. You've got beauty, different levels of beauty as well. You've also got some other inheritable traits, like, for example, actually physique is not strong anymore. Strong you get from training, which makes more sense. Physique is actually a separate thing. I believe physique good 3 is actually called Herculean, or something like that in the game. Which is more to do with health and less to do with physical strength. Because, you know, sure, you can be born strong or whatever else, but to be strong, you need to obviously train. Otherwise, you could just be a big, stinky, Midas-touched boy counting coin all his life, never doing a goddamn honest day's work, and still somehow being strong. Doesn't really make much sense. beauty levels, and then, of course, zealous, pure-blooded, fecund, strong, or shrewd. It's basically that. Now, there's the other interesting thing. What you can actually do with the list. You can say every character in the list, and the list in this case is stinky, kill them. It's so simple in CK3 to actually manipulate multiple characters at once, and I'm a massive fan of this. This is going to be so much more useful than trying to set a bunch of flags or setting up really complicated scopes. Some of the things we did in Dungeon Master were absurd. Kepbit recently added a kind of scope to the Snap event, and it was like characters who have, you know, a valid heir, or any other child is a valid heir, etc., etc., and you end up with these such massive long scopes, which cover a whole bunch of different characters. Instead, you could just do list. I wasn't the best example, because in hindsight, you would still need to put some limits on it, but it's great. I mean, it's a really nice, helpful little feature there, and then those are all dead. What happens after that? Well, you go into your ruler designer. Again, this is going to be fairly similar. It's only a very simple mod, but I do a little bit of variable manipulation in this one. There's a bit I think I forgot to save. So when the event first pops up, again, same thing. You've got your descriptions, your theme, your portrait, whatever else. This sets a variable in the immediate, rerolls remaining value 5. Similar, I mean identical, as far as I can remember, to the CK2 system here. I then added a scripted effect of reset all traits. So CK3 is actually limited. You can only have 3 personality traits from what I remember. And you can have any other amounts of any other traits, but stress is a big part of things. Your character's personality is a big part of things in CK3, right? So as a result of that, personality is a bit more rigid. You can adjust it, but of course it comes at the cost of stress. So I've written a scripted effect here, which again, identical to Crusader Kings II. Quite simply allows you to predefine a bunch of things. Now, interestingly, root is not always implicit in CK3 scripted effects, from what I've noted. So in this case, we want root to remove all of their traits that are relevant. So any personality trait, illnesses, whatever else. You don't want to load in as a character. I think it's impossible for you to end up with an illness. But say you spawn in a country that has a plague and you get it within the first day. I thought that'd be a bit of a pain in the ass to immediately die after your family has been completely wiped out. Kind of a fallback, maybe unnecessary. But this scripted effect will just simply remove all the traits. Again, very similar to CK2 with the caveat that you do have to include that root, that root scope implicitly. Reset all traits is then yes, so run that, remove all the traits, reset it, give us a fresh slate so we can create a new character with. What happens when you create a new character? Well, this will launch a secondary event with 4 options: diplomacy, martial, stewardship, intrigue. I could have set it up with learning, obviously opening a new page and then setting learning, but let's be reasonable. Who the hell wants a character with learning? Maybe they've changed it in CK3. I don't have much gameplay experience, but it might be more useful now, to be honest with you. Anyway, we've got these 3. Now, when you pick one of those, that will immediately subtract, so change variable, roles remaining, subtracting 1 from that. As far as I recall, in CK2, you did change variable by -1, didn't you? Whereas this time you're actually explicitly saying subtract 1. And what happens if you try and subtract by -1? I assume it will just add 1 on. Which is kind of basically how you had to do it in CK2, right? But this time it's obviously a lot more clear-cut, very obvious about what's going on here. So the variable rerolls remaining has 1 taken away from it. What I actually forgot to do, and this is the thing that I added and forgot to save, is that this option, I meant to put a trigger on it to check the variable rerolls remaining to see if the value was above 0. If it was not above 0, this option would then not trigger. You would only have the option to just say, I'm done, thanks. That's what I forgot to save. I'll add that back on if I ever get around to releasing it. I probably won't, because I imagine the ruler designer won't be much around the corner. So if you press the diplomacy option, you will get a random trait between level 2 and level 4. So what used to be, what was it, like gruff diplomat to grey eminence in this situation. You then have a chance of getting gregarious, calm, honest, or gregarious. But of course, if you're trying to random the best and most optimized diplomacy character using all 5 of your randoms on that, there's also a small chance that you could lose those traits as well. So you've got to be a little bit careful. It's only a 25% chance to get it in the first place, and then a 10% chance to take it away. So you could use all 5 rerolls and end up getting fairly lucky with gregarious, calm, and honest, but you also run the risk of obviously losing those if you get particularly unlucky as well. Similarly, you've got your custom tooltip there. I'm not going to go through the rest of it, because it's all more or less the same crap, but hopefully you can see at kind of a glance here that the CK2 to CK3 transition is going to be very, very straightforward when you've picked up the new kind of scoping system, where rather than using event targets, you just kind of define a scope. learning, for me, the kind of making a model like this is very simple, right? Night and day, wake up, do this with my eyes closed. This is straightforward stuff. What I'm going to have to learn now is how to optimize it using the new systems, and that's going to be why I want to take a kind of break from this series, step back from it, learn the new systems, wait for that wiki to come up, start contributing to that, and hopefully we can get kind of a community thing together where we're all documenting how things go down here. Learning those new features to make things a lot easier, kind of learning, or more specifically, unlearning the CK2 way of doing things, and hopefully using a much more modern and simple, not simplified, much more sensible system, I think is the right word for it. So we'll leave it there for today. I'm not going to do much more of a deep dive into that, short of, we could quite literally open up the CK2 files and go through all of them, and you can sort of see some various different things, but it's all... for those of you who have used CK2, it's simple stuff. This isn't going to take much of a transition to get over to. You can see here, in effect, if your spouse is not landed, then your spouse becomes English, for example. It's such simple stuff if you are used to that CK2 syntax and parlance and order and whatever else, with some additional changes to make room for the new tech that's come in. I'm quite excited to see what people are going to do with this, because I think I've got a lot of big plans, but, I'm a little bit busy, so my big plans always tend to fall by the wayside. But I'm excited to see what people can do with this, because I think there's a lot more... I think it is more complex than the CK2 system, but much more approachable, simultaneously, than the CK2 system, if that makes sense. Easy to learn, difficult to master, is the expression that I think you could very much apply to Crusader Kings III's modding systems this time around. Anyway, this is only meant as an introductory video, and I think it's gone on for roughly 4 or 5 hours now. So, thank you all for watching. I apologize if this was a little bit rambly, but again, I've only really had a couple of days since I've come back from holiday to kind of learn the systems. I've only had, and that's on top of making 2 videos a day, and doing the modding, and setting up the new RimWorld mod pack, so I've been absolutely swamped with work. I will learn this better. You have my word, and I will educate the masses, or try to educate the masses. And as always, Discord is open to any modding help you might need between myself and the other people when we get a bit more used to the CK3 side of things. And I hope to see some good work out there, people, because us YouTubers, we don't have a creative bone in our body. We leech off of other people, and we need your mods to make ourselves seem more interesting. Thank you. And that's the Roll D2 Games guarantee. As our final thing here, I did promise we would take a look at the debugging mode for CK3. Debugging mode is very different to your console and char info that you got in CK2. Before we go into it, I have been asked to make it apparent that it isn't meant to be a publicly used tool. It is a debugging tool only. This is not intended to be part and parcel of the game. This is not something the developers intended the average person to see. You have to use a debug mode launch option in Steam to even get access to it. Basically, I think if you break anything, this is on your own. I've also been asked to basically show that this is, not really something the player was ever supposed to see. Good for modders, perhaps, but things might not work as intended. Things might be slightly broken. Things might not even work at all. If you use the debug mode, essentially be it on your head. Let's take a look at it then. Caution to the wind. Let's take a look. So yeah, just please bear that in mind. And bear in mind that it might change in the future as well. So everything you see here could not even make it into the final build. I'm not entirely sure. First thing you'll notice, we've got some additional map modes. We've got Realms map mode, which we're on anyway. We've got Terrain map mode, which I think is kind of cool. It just lets you see the lovely graphics of the map. Obviously somewhere between the kind of paper map there and zooming down to the baronies. Just lets you see that. When you zoom into the baronies normally, again, for those of you who don't have much gameplay experience, it will look like this anyway. But it's kind of when you're at this level. Normally it does have the kind of colored map as you're used to. Baronies map mode. Really cool if you want to see the various different baronies, if you are a geography nut, if you are a history nut, if you are a map modder, if you are a pedant of some various different breed unmentioned, you can see all your baronies, you can adjust your borders, you can get very angry that Paradox have made your home county a slightly wrong shape, or whatever it is people like that do. Areas map mode show areas, unsurprisingly. Now this doesn't necessarily correlate to, I would assume, the... let's see if I can find a good example. Right, so Ireland there. Look at the colours on Ireland between the Realms map mode and the area map mode. It's different areas. It makes sense. You know how areas work in CK2, I would assume, so that's not really worth mentioning too much. You've got diplo range, so an actual physical manifestation of the diplomatic range, rather than just kind of like, oh, you're in diplo range, click on working out. No, you can actually see it. Good for testing if your mod characters, I assume, can interact. You've got character pools, so what characters appear in what pool? Do you want to appear in D'Angria? Do you want Vikings to appear in Scandinavia? Well, that would be in this area, quite obviously. And then you've got AI war coordination targets. I'm not really sure what this means, to be honest with you. AI war coordinate target, you can kind of just highlight particular areas which are affected by... Maybe this is when they're checking for a thing. They can weigh up the pros and cons of a particular realm a little bit easier. I have no idea. Again, I've had very little time to get a lot of hands-on experience with the modding side of things, particularly the debug mode, which I've only really known for a couple of days. So, where is the big stuff? Well, firstly, one of the big things of note is the province IDs actually being on the tooltip, rather than you having to open up the province list text file in CK2, or go into the provinces folder in CK2, typing in the name and looking at the correlating number. It actually shows you. And that's, of course, of the barony too, because baronies are really all that count in CK3. So you can see here the barony of Napoli has an ID of 2008. The city of Amalfi has an ID of 2611. You can see your C tiles also have various different IDs there. It's got an X and Y coordinate, which is quite nice as well. I assume that could maybe play into 3D modeling for those of you who perhaps want to spawn. Does that affect it as we scroll around? So that is a set position on the map, not actually a position on the screen region, which is interesting. So that means if you wanted to stick, I don't know, a big old Hagia Sophia on Byzantium, well, there's one already there, but you kind of get my point. A bigger one, or Hadrian's Wall, unless there's one already there. Shit, there's already one there. They've beat me to it. Pyramids? Look, you kind of get my point. If you want to stick down big world wonders, I can't see any pyramids actually. Then you can do that. That's an option. So bear that in mind. Anyway, I assume. Again, this is all assumptions really, but I assume that's what you can kind of get direct map coordinates for. A bit more simple than CK2 as well. Here's the cool thing. So you can still hover over your character like you can with CK2. You can see their fertility, their health, their stress, and their weight. But this is kind of just things about your character. To actually see the big boy information is up here on... And this is a bit more similar to what you would see on a char info screen of CK2. However, unlike CK2, AI have access to a bunch more stats. So in CK2, the only hidden stats for the AI were honor, greed, rationality, and zeal. In CK3, you've got honor, greed, rationality, energy, boldness, dread, modifier, boldness, zeal, vengefulness, and compassion, and also sociability there. You've got variables too. These are flags, character flags, but of course those are now falling under the new variable system, so that's worth pointing out. This is quite cool, because it means you can see a much deeper dive into characters. More importantly, it means that you can create AI with actually some personality, because last time all characters in CK2, their personalities were simply defined by 4 stats going from negative 100 to positive 100. Now you've got all sorts of crazy things. Dread modifier, boldness, zeal, so if they're particularly dreadful, their boldness might increase. Vengefulness, which sounds incredible. I love the sound of that. So you've actually got a lot of different variation in that regard too. Here's where it gets really, really cool. I can hit this button, and you can see some real fancy shit. Now, again, bear in mind that you could see some things here that may not work as intended. The developers did not intend for regular players to see this. This is something that you use at your own caution, essentially, and it also might not work. There are no promises that this could ever work. So, this is what took my eye. I haven't tested this, because, again, time is of the essence this week. Run file is insane. Edit run.text to change what this button does. I wonder if it will allow you to dynamically deploy code to the game rather than having to reload. If that's true, that's big. Because there are so many times, a lot of my time in CK2, and I'm sure a lot of modders can also attest to this, is making a silly mistake and having to reboot the entire game to adjust a missing bracket, or something spelt wrong, or doing AI in lowercase or uppercase when you're meant to do the opposite, or whatever happens to be the case. This might allow you to dynamically deploy code from in-game without that reload necessary, which if that is the case, is phenomenal. I cannot confirm or deny that. Depending on how complex this thing gets, and depending on whether or not it makes it to the release version, depending on if they ever do anything with it, I'll make a follow-up video on this. That's another one that you have my word on, because this seems like it could be an incredible modding tool. Which, again, is why I sent an email to the kind of Paradox rep I've been emailing. Like, hey, can I, actually show this off in a video? Do I have permission to show this? Because this could be massive for modders. Observe mode. Observe mode, you know how that be. Enable or disable the AI. Now, this is one where it says unknown command, so I assume this is one of those kind of things that was one of the caveats that might not be working right now. I assume if that were the case, the AI just wouldn't take decisions and things like that. Enable disable yes man at the click of a button. Phenomenal for Let's Players who need to cheat but want to get away with it. Except not. Obviously, you can't do that in CK3 because it's very obvious if someone has debug mode on by the fact that you've got all this crap over at the side and obviously AI value, things like that. I wonder what happens if we go like that. Oh. Never mind, Let's Players who are bad at CK2. You're saved. You can still get away with it. Phenomenal. We'll leave that on, obviously, for the time being. Kill your current player character, I assume. Call me crazy. If I press this button, we die. What a shocker. Brilliant. We've got gain 1,000 prestige, right click, lose 1,000 prestige. So really good, just kind of very casual testing things here, which I really, really like. I think that's fantastic. Switch between environment, lighting, cube maps. Oh, graphic stuff. Okay, I want to look at this myself at some point. I'm not going to talk about it right now because obviously I don't know what any of it does. Tweak map objects so we can, I guess, turn off rivers. You can draw rivers? Oh, look at this. You got all sorts of graphic issues. Okay, there's actually a practical application to this that I don't know if people will have considered, that if you're playing on like a real brick of a PC, if you're playing for a PC from 1912, using dev mode, if someone writes up a good instruction list, that someone might be me, you could potentially get this running on anything. Sure, you might have to make some compromises there, and it might not be stable. And again, it's not necessarily recommended. You might have to run dev mode, but you could really knock this down, huh? Worth mentioning. I'll bear that in mind. This one is kind of cool. The Portrait Editor, which allows you to create your custom characters. You can actually, and this is actually really cool. There was a program created for CK2 that essentially did this, but not to this depth, not to this value. You can create all sorts of different things. Pick a template. Let's say we want to make, I don't know, African. Randomized DNA. Gives you different characters there. You can hit all sorts of different options. So you see these two characters, child might look like that or that. I think that's really cool. I mean, the faces are incredible, aren't they? They're like so well rendered in such good detail. It's a shame that they're kind of so much smaller than what you can see here, right? Because they've got so much more detail than what it lets on for. Randomize accept template. So again, you've got some more various different things here. Age 25%. What happens if we... Oh, we can make them old. That is frightening. Wow, thank you for that. We've got poses here, which again, I'm not entirely sure is working right now. Hair colors, different various... I mean, you can adjust so much stuff. Change their eye depth position. You can see kind of Sims style almost. Their eyes changing depth. This is so insane for character customization, isn't it? It's so good. Got 3D view. Oh, no. I've seen things. Anyway, this has a phenomenal amount of options, and of course there are nude models, so just bear that in mind. There is actually a game option to disable that for Let's Plays, things like that. Of course, I'll most likely be using that always. But more to the point, copy and paste DNA strings. Now, for those of you who remember DNA strings from CK2, it was barely 12 characters. In this, it is insane by comparison. There's so much. So, for creating custom characters for your history files, whatever else, a phenomenal tool to actually throw into the game there. I think they've really gone above and beyond for a lot of modding things. Purge portrait cache. No, thank you. Let's get rid of... How do I close this down? Be gone. Oh, there's an X button. Who'd have thought? Wow, you can open up multiple windows of that in-game. Jesus, this shit's optimized. Okay. Language. So I assume I can go Latin. Am I Latin now? That doesn't seem very Latin. Maybe that's just a test of what they threw in German. That doesn't look very German either. Again, none of this stuff might work. But here's... Okay, so ignoring all my other crap that I've just talked about there, there's something quite interesting that I found for modders out there, and that is the watch window. You can see what happens to a character dynamically in real time. You can set to pause on change. You can see if your events are working basically as intended on AI, player characters, whatever. You can see the variables they get. You can see the events that they're going to be thrown at. It's so... You get a real inside look at CK3 with these tools, and again, I'm hoping that they decide to keep them in the release build. I'm praying. I don't see why they wouldn't, and I'm hoping they do more with it because, I mean, expand on it. I would pay for DLC that adds mod tools to this level because this is high quality stuff. I mean, the portrait alone is just phenomenal, right? The portrait modifier. Anyway. That's basically debug mode. I won't go too deep into it because, again, I don't have much experience here and I'm just I'm learning as much as you are going through this. So, just something to bear in mind that that is an option. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about how to actually enable that. The email didn't specifically say anything against it, and I did say I would be showing it off. So, it is quite simply -debug_mode in your Steam launch options gives you access to this. But this, for me, is going to be phenomenal. A great tool. A great tool for modders everywhere. Anyway, that'll do for today, because I think I've rambled on for long enough. And again, I'll do a dedicated video to the debug tool, because I think it's going to be phenomenal. Again, especially if they do make alterations to it in the future. So in conclusion, thank you all for watching. If you watched the whole thing, congratulations, you're braver than I. Apologize that this wasn't maybe more heavily scripted. I wish I'd have had more time to actually... you know, come up with some more in-depth stuff here. I only had enough time to throw together the kind of basic things because my key, I didn't get it till late, obviously, in the pre-release cycle. And also, I was on holiday, which definitely didn't help things. I thought, oh, they're probably not going to send a key at this point. I'm on holiday. So not really great timing there. But this is cool. This is they've got some really phenomenal features for modding this time around. Again, it's going to take a little bit of a transitional period between CK2 and CK3, but I think it's going to be very, very straightforward. I think the new tools we've got access to are going to offer us a lot of fun, and is that not what it's all about? And again, the mod management stuff is so much better. Everything is a step up. I really have nothing to complain about with the modding at all, and I mean that sincerely. A lot of people ask me, you know, what's your genuine opinion on CK3 when I was putting up the Dev Diary videos? And I'm telling you right now, I mean it sincerely, everything is an improvement over CK2 with regards to the modding. Can't speak for gameplay so much because I barely had time to do any bloody gameplay given everything else on the plate, but yeah. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this one. Again, thank you for sticking with me for as long as you have. If you're interested in, of course, future episodes for this series, stand by. And I'm sure I'll get some up, like I said, after the dust is settled. Give it a week for maybe some early patches to come out for some alterations and maybe changes to the dev mode, see if that actually gets in the game, and basically give me time to learn the new systems and wikis and things, and we will hopefully hit the ground running with some CK3 modded content. We do have a CK3 series going on as well, where I'm playing as a custom character that I've created, because of course I did. Where we are trying to collect, we're trying to go from terrible genetics to great genetics. So I think that'll be quite an interesting series for those of you interested, especially with some of the new mechanics too. So please go ahead and take a look at that one. Of course, I have to give an explicit thank you to Paradox for providing me a CK3 key earlier to actually give me the opportunity to produce this all in time, because otherwise that would have been quite difficult to pull off. So I'm very appreciative to those guys for launching that over into my direction, and thank you to the Paradox rep as well, who's been going back and forth with me about what I can and cannot show, giving me permission for the debug mode and the modding side of things, particularly because I know a lot of people in the community, especially in my community, are interested in that type of thing, I think, by now, given the amount of bloody series we've done on it. Anyway, thank you. And I have to give a thank you, of course, to the supporters of the channel, the coffee and the Patreons, for the, of course, final month of Patreon as well. Those people who have enabled me to sit here for the past God knows how many hours throwing together a vague modding video for you guys to take a look at. So I will give my thank yous out to my usual squad, including for today over on Coffee, Ben, DPB, Karma Doctor, Hero of My Crotch, Philosophical Your Prize, Callum James 3, Scott L, Firescream, Sideshow C, Tom B, Skaz, Ethox, Devorder, Simba, Ice Stab Cows, and Zetlock, along with Darth Hawk, Vacuous, Bacchus, Zyrix, Under the Couch, Layla, Pang Power, Facundo Vasquez, Anthony Gawley, Chris, Justin Rules, Angelo, Michael Mullen, Scare Blueberry, Cruskull, and Shay. All of those people were at the executive producer tiers, and now my grandparents are calling me. And a thank you as well to Llewellyn Thomas, Pantherpearl, Devorder, Aramis, Prometheo, Voodoo Mumbo, Archbishop, Danny, Mythomatic, Couchsitter, Grey, Luciola, Betimus Max, Tempe, and Fenrir over at Patreon. And finally, Ribbit, Pantherpearl, Athon Monster, The Thick Mick, Noisest Dungeon, Dancing Lucifer, Contrawabby, Groggy, Rayka Ringer, Sanet Lover, Madness, El Nada, Stormcrower, and Pyrotica, finally, for their support over at those various many platforms where we have to eat our food to survive on. Otherwise, we die. Thanks, YouTube. Very cool. See you all tomorrow for Crusader Kings III, I guess, and CK2, and all my other usual stuff.